The mist still clings to the ruins of Countess castle, its crumbling walls whispering secrets from the past. Behind its once grand facade, a nightmare unfolded, one that would etch the name Elizabeth Báthory into history as one of the most feared and debated figures of the 17th century. Born into immense wealth and power, she moved through Europe's elite circles with the grace of nobility, yet beneath her polished exterior lurked something far darker. Whispers began to spread, stories of missing peasant girls, of blood-stained corridors, of a woman so consumed by vanity that she bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her fading beauty. By the time authorities dared to investigate, the rumors had swelled into something monstrous. What they uncovered inside her castle would haunt them forever. Young women imprisoned in darkness, their bodies bearing the marks of unspeakable torture. Some were starved, others frozen alive. Some had their flesh seared with hot irons, while others were sliced open, their blood collected like a macabre elixir. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds, some claimed, though the truth may never be fully known. Yet questions linger. Was Elizabeth truly a sadistic killer, or was she a convenient target for powerful men eager to seize her lands? Did the legend of the Blood Countess grow from fact, or was it spun from fear and political scheming? The answers lie buried in time, tangled in folklore and fragmented records. But one thing is certain. The echoes of her story still send a shiver down the spine, a reminder of how easily history can twist into nightmare. Elizabeth Báthory's privileged yet ominous upbringing laid the foundation for her infamous legacy. Born on August 7, 1560, in near Bátor, Hungary, she entered a world where her family's influence rivaled that of royalty. The Báthory lineage included Transylvanian princes, Polish kings, and military leaders who had fought against the Ottoman Empire's expansion. Her uncle, Stephen Báthory, would later become King of Poland, while other relatives governed vast territories with near-autonomous power. This environment of absolute authority and impunity shaped Elizabeth's worldview from her earliest years. The young Countess received an exceptional education for her time, becoming fluent in Latin, German, and Hungarian, a rarity among women in 16th-century Europe. Contemporary accounts describe her as strikingly beautiful, with pale skin, dark hair, and piercing eyes that seemed to command obedience. However, her privileged existence was marred by disturbing episodes. Family records suggest she suffered from violent seizures and fits of rage from childhood, symptoms that modern historians speculate may have been signs of epilepsy or severe mental illness. At age 11, Elizabeth was betrothed to Ferenc Nadasdy, the 15-year-old heir to another powerful Hungarian family. Their formal marriage in 1570, when Elizabeth was just 15, united two of the kingdom's most formidable dynasties. The wedding celebration at the Báthory family's Exed castle lasted an entire month, featuring extravagant feasts and attended by Hungary's elite. Nadasdy, known as the Black Knight for his ruthless military campaigns against the Ottomans, was frequently away from home, leaving his young bride to manage their extensive estates alone. During these formative years, Elizabeth developed a fascination with the occult and alchemy, common among nobility of the period, but taken to extremes in her case. She surrounded herself with servants rumored to practice witchcraft, including her nurse, Ilona Jo, and a dwarf named Dorothea Sentes. Isolated in remote castles like Chaktij, with unlimited power over hundreds of servants and peasant subjects, Elizabeth's darker tendencies found fertile ground. The absence of her warrior husband, combined with the complete lack of oversight typical of feudal nobility, allowed her cruel impulses to grow unchecked. Historical documents reveal that Elizabeth's descent into brutality began subtly, excessive punishments for minor household infractions that gradually escalated in severity. A 1585 letter from a local priest mentions his concern over the Countess's unusual discipline of her servants, though such complaints were routinely ignored due to her status. By the time Nadasdy died in 1604, possibly from poisoning. Elizabeth had already established a pattern of violence that would soon spiral into the atrocities that made her infamous. The death of her husband left her with even greater autonomy over their vast holdings, removing the last potential check on her behavior as she entered her most notorious period. The first whispers of Elizabeth's cruelty emerged like dark stains, spreading across fine silk, small at first, but impossible to ignore. Court records and servant testimonies paint a chilling portrait of a noblewoman whose wrath burned hot over the slightest imperfections. A maid's trembling hands might spill a drop of wine, only to find the Countess's jeweled rings cutting into her cheek before she could beg forgiveness. A seamstress whose stitches strayed could expect her fingers crushed in a doorframe as punishment. These were not the ordinary disciplinary measures of Renaissance nobility, but something far more personal, a growing obsession with inflicting pain that seemed to bring Elizabeth perverse satisfaction. Some scholars trace this descent into brutality to her husband's influence. Ferenc Nadasdy, fresh from the battlefields, where he earned his Black Knight moniker, was said to regale his young bride with stories of the tortures he inflicted on Ottoman prisoners. Servants later claimed he demonstrated techniques for Elizabeth's amusement, showing her how to slide needles beneath fingernails to extract confessions, or binding victims naked to trees after coating them in honey, leaving them to the mercy of swarming insects. The castle's underground chambers, originally built for storing wine, gradually transformed into workshops of suffering, where Elizabeth experimented with these horrors on peasant girls brought up from the village. What began as casual cruelty soon became ritualized, the punishments growing increasingly elaborate with each passing year, as if the Countess were perfecting some grotesque art form. By the time her husband died, leaving her sole ruler of their vast estates, the line between discipline and outright sadism had been irreparably erased. The death of Ferenc Nadasdy in 1604 marked the turning point where Elizabeth's cruelty transformed into something far more sinister. With her warrior husband gone, some whispered by poison, though none dared accuse her openly, the Countess withdrew completely into the brooding isolation of Countess Castle. The great halls that once hosted lavish feasts now echoed with an eerie silence, broken only by the muffled sobs coming from the underground chambers. It was during these lonely years that Elizabeth's fixation on youth and beauty curdled into madness. The story goes that one fateful day, as a young maid nervously brushed her mistress's dark hair, the tug of a tangled strand provoked an explosion of violence. Elizabeth's backhanded blow sent the girl sprawling, her split lip spraying droplets of crimson across the Countess's pale hand. As Elizabeth stared at the blood stains, a terrible alchemy occurred. Where others saw violence, she saw rejuvenation. The spots where the blood had touched her skin seemed, to her deluded eyes, smoother and more vibrant than the surrounding flesh. From that moment forward, the aging noblewoman became consumed by a monstrous conviction that the blood of virgins held the secret to eternal youth. What began as a single violent incident spiraled into an organized horror, as Elizabeth's servants were dispatched to nearby villages with increasingly implausible excuses for why young women were needed at the castle. First as maids, then as students, at her supposed finishing school for noble girls. Few returned, and those who did bore haunted expressions and strange scars they refused to explain. The castle's once grand chambers were quietly converted into torture rooms, their walls soundproofed with layers of drapes and straw, while the nearby streams ran red on certain moonless nights when the screams seemed loudest. Elizabeth's obsession grew so consuming that she reportedly kept detailed records of each treatment, noting which girl's blood produced the most noticeable effects, a ledger that would later vanish mysteriously when authorities finally came knocking. Deep beneath Countess Castle's opulent halls lay a hidden world of unimaginable suffering, a labyrinth of damp stone chambers where Elizabeth Báthory's darkest fantasies became reality. The testimonies of surviving servants, extracted under torture themselves, revealed a nightmare gallery of cruelty that still chills the blood centuries later. In these windowless pits, young women, many barely past childhood, endured torments that blended medieval punishment with something far more sinister. Some prisoners were subjected to a grotesque cycle of starvation and forced gluttony, their emaciated bodies suddenly stuffed with rich food before being stabbed in their distended stomachs. Others knew the searing kiss of white-hot irons pressed against their flesh in intricate patterns, their screams muffled by layers of tapestries hung throughout the castle's corridors. The cruelest inventions showed a perverse creativity. Victims stripped naked and drenched in freezing water during winter nights, their bodies slowly turning to ice, statues that guards would shatter at dawn. But the most haunting accounts speak of the blood harvests, where specially designed instruments like silver scissors and curved razors were used to carefully drain living victims without killing them immediately. Servants described floors slick with crimson, and the Countess herself sometimes participating directly, her fine silk gown speckled with red, as she moved between thrashing victims with the focus of a gardener tending prized roses. While popular legend claims 600 perished, court documents list 80 confirmed deaths, though historians agree the true number likely falls somewhere in between, with many peasant girls disappearing without record. What remains undisputed is the methodical nature of the horrors, each act carefully calculated to prolong suffering, while producing the maximum amount of that precious, life-extending fluid the Countess so desperately craved. The terror might have continued indefinitely had the victims remained peasant girls whose disappearances could be easily explained away. But when daughters of the lower nobility began vanishing after visits to Countess Castle, the whispers that had long circulated through Hungarian villages finally reached the royal court in Vienna. King Matthias II, already wary of the Báthory family's growing power, could no longer ignore the disturbing reports flowing from the Hungarian countryside. Tales of wagons arriving at the castle under cover of darkness, of ghostly figures seen burying bundles by moonlight, of fishermen pulling mutilated corpses from the Va River with strange symbols carved into their flesh. In December 1610, the king authorized a surprise investigation led by his trusted Palatine, György Thurzo. What the officials discovered when they forced their way into Countess Castle would become the stuff of nightmares. The stench hit them first, a metallic tang of blood mixed with the sweet rot of decaying flesh that permeated even the grandest chambers. In the dungeons below, they found girls in various states of torment, some barely alive, their bodies a patchwork of burns and cuts, others locked in iron cages, their fingernails torn out. The castle's cellars revealed even grislier secrets. Carefully stacked corpses, some drained of blood, others frozen in grotesque positions. Most damning of all was the discovery of a leather-bound diary, its pages meticulously detailing Elizabeth's atrocities over the years. The ledger allegedly contained names, dates, and chillingly specific notes about each victim's suffering and the effects of their blood. This crucial evidence mysteriously disappeared before the trial, fueling centuries of speculation about a royal cover-up to avoid embarrassing one of Europe's most powerful families. The investigators, hardened men who had witnessed the brutalities of war, reportedly crossed themselves in horror at what they'd uncovered. A noblewoman's private hell, operating undisturbed for years beneath their very noses. The legal proceedings that followed the raid on Countess Castle revealed the uncomfortable truth about justice in Renaissance Europe. Noble blood carried more weight than human lives. Despite overwhelming evidence of her crimes, Elizabeth Báthory never stood trial. The political ramifications of publicly executing a woman related to kings and princes were deemed too dangerous, threatening to destabilize the delicate balance of power in Hungary. Instead, a quiet compromise was reached behind closed doors at the royal court. While Elizabeth's name appeared on no official indictment, Her closest servants, those who had facilitated her horrors, faced the full brutality of the law. Her washerwoman Ilona Jo, dwarf servant Dorothea Sentes, and the alleged witch János Újvári were subjected to excruciating tortures before their public executions, their confessions extracted with hot pincers and bone-crushing devices. Their torn bodies, displayed on spikes throughout the countryside, served as a warning while allowing the aristocracy to save face. For Elizabeth herself, punishment took a more genteel but equally final form. On a cold December night in 1610, masons arrived at Countess Castle to brick her into a small set of chambers, a living tomb with only narrow slits for food and air to pass through. There, the once feared Blood Countess spent her final years in solitary confinement, her world reduced to a few paces of stone floor, her legendary beauty withering in the darkness. Servants reported hearing her wails echoing through the castle corridors at night, alternating between furious demands for release and mad ramblings about her lost youth. When death finally came for her in August 1614, it found Elizabeth alone, her body discovered by a guard peering through the food slot, her once lustrous hair now white and matted, her claw-like fingers still stained faintly red from years of bloody obsession. Even in death, the nobility protected their own. She was buried secretly in the Báthory family crypt, her grave unmarked to prevent desecration. The official records listed her passing with dry formality, making no mention of the hundreds of lives destroyed by her madness, as if the most prolific female serial killer in history had simply faded quietly into the night. As centuries passed, and the dust settled on Elizabeth Báthory's macabre legend, historians began peeling back layers of myth to reveal a more complex truth. The notorious blood baths that cemented her monstrous reputation appear nowhere in contemporary trial documents. These grisly details emerge decades later in sensationalized accounts. Modern scholars note disturbing inconsistencies in the official narrative. The convenient timing of her downfall, coinciding with King Matthias II's need to confiscate her vast estates to pay his war debts, the reliance on testimonies extracted through torture, the mysterious disappearance of her alleged diary of victims. Some theorists suggest Elizabeth may have been the victim of a political witch hunt, her crimes exaggerated to justify seizing her property. Others propose a middle ground, that while she undoubtedly tortured and killed servants, a horrifying but not uncommon practice among nobility at the time, the vampiric elements were embellished to create a cautionary tale about female power gone mad. The Blood Countess's legacy persists like a stubborn stain on history's tapestry. Bram Stoker reportedly considered making her the protagonist of Dracula before settling on Vlad the Impaler, and her specter haunts countless novels, films, and heavy metal lyrics. She's become shorthand for the monstrous feminine, a warning about what happens when women reject maternal gentleness for violent agency. Yet contemporary feminist scholars reframe her story, seeing in Elizabeth both a genuine murderer and a convenient scapegoat for a society uncomfortable with powerful women. The psychological portrait that emerges is of a privileged woman whose absolute power bred absolute corruption, whose isolation and possible mental illness spiraled into atrocity when left unchecked. Perhaps the most chilling possibility is that the truth lies somewhere between the historical record and the legend, that a noblewoman did commit terrible crimes, and that the myths surrounding them reveal just how deeply her story unnerves us. Centuries later, the real Elizabeth may be forever lost, buried beneath layers of politics, misogyny, and our own cultural fascination with beautiful monsters. The crumbling walls of Countess Castle stand as broken sentinels overlooking the Slovakian countryside, their weathered stones holding secrets that refuse to stay buried. Visitors who brave the overgrown path to the ruins often report an unnatural silence hanging over the site. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just a heavy stillness that seems to press against the skin. Locals speak in hushed tones about pale figures glimpsed at twilight, their tattered gowns fluttering as they drift through the broken archways, their silent mouths open in eternal screams. Archaeologists, armed with ground-penetrating radar, have identified several anomalies beneath the castle courtyard, disturbances in the soil that could be mass graves, though political sensitivities and lack of funding have prevented full excavation. The nearby village still bears the psychic scars of those terrible years. Older families warn their children not to play near the castle after dark, and some claim the Va River runs red for one night each year, on the anniversary of Elizabeth's death. Modern attempts to understand the full scope of her crimes face frustrating dead ends. Historical records scattered across Eastern European archives, potential evidence lost to wars and regime changes, the inconvenient truth that many practices we consider torture were standard punishment in her era. Yet the legend persists, evolving with each generation. Paranormal investigators claim their equipment malfunctions within the castle walls, while psychologists study Elizabeth's life as an early case study of serial killer pathology. The ruins have become a macabre pilgrimage site where history, folklore, and the supernatural collide, where visitors can stand in what was once her private chamber and feel, just for a moment, the weight of centuries of horror pressing in around them. Whether Elizabeth Báthory was a monster, a victim, or some complex combination of both, her story taps into our deepest fears about the corruption of power, the fragility of sanity, and the darkness that can fester in isolation. As long as the castle stones remain standing, whispering their wordless secrets to the wind, the Blood Countess will continue her reign as history's most haunting noblewoman, a warning etched in blood and time. The echoes of Elizabeth Báthory's story continue to reverberate through time, leaving us with more questions than answers. Was she truly the bloodthirsty monster of legend, bathing in the vitality of virgins to preserve her fading beauty? Or was she a powerful woman whose wealth and independence made her a target for powerful men seeking to destroy her? The truth may lie somewhere in the shadows, between history and myth, buried beneath layers of political intrigue, medieval superstition, and our own fascination with the macabre. What remains undeniable is the enduring power of her legend, a tale so shocking it has survived 4 centuries, evolving from whispered village horror stories to global pop culture icon. The Blood Countess has become more than a historical figure. She's a mirror reflecting our deepest fears about power unchecked, beauty obsessed, and the human capacity for cruelty. As the moon rises over the ruins of Choctice Castle, casting long shadows where screams once echoed, we're left to wonder, how many of her victims' names have been lost to time? How many secrets still lie buried in those cursed grounds? And most chilling of all, could such darkness emerge again? If this journey into one of history's most disturbing criminal cases has captivated you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to join us for more shocking true crime stories from across the ages. From medieval murderers to modern-day serial killers, Crime Tales Across Time brings you the most fascinating, terrifying cases that history has to offer. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe Elizabeth Báthory was guilty of all the atrocities attributed to her, or was she a victim of political conspiracy? Until our next investigation into history's darkest corners, stay safe, stay curious, and maybe sleep with the lights on. This is Crime Tales Across Time, signing off, but the shadows never truly leave us.